Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 14 of Masks and Mimicry Tabletop Role-Playing Podcast. As always, I'm Vellic. This is Brand.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk about roleplay tips for new roleplayers. Specifically tabletop roleplay tips, because there are other types of roleplay, and most of these really apply to those as well. But
Sure.
we'll be focusing on tabletop a little bit, I guess.
There's a slight difference there. So
There is, and there are some things that apply to some that don't apply to others. I think most of what we're going to be talking about today, since it focuses on beginners in tabletop roleplay, and in this we mean actual character roleplay, not just playing an RPG on tabletop, but actually getting into your character and portraying them more, because that is something that I know that some people get edgy about the first couple of times. They tend to play tabletop without doing that. Even the first couple of times I played tabletop games, I didn't really roleplay a character much. I had some general ideas of what my character was going to be like, but it was all pretty general. And I think what we'll get into a little bit is that's sometimes okay, even when you're role playing a character, especially if you're newer. The core things I want to hit on here today are addressing some fallacies with tabletop character roleplay, talking about familiarity with the people you're playing with, some basic rules of the road for roleplay that, things that you should bear in mind and should do that kind of apply universally. And then just some general tips for how to roleplay better without necessarily, being super involved, without being something that's a huge degree of effort or time, or requires you to really be skilled or specialized or experienced in anything. So,
sounds good.
to start with the first, I wanted to address some things that we might see as fallacies, some things that you think people might have in mind about roleplay, or things that might be put out there by other people or by other examples, like excellent stream shows and stuff that give people an idea of what roleplay has to be, when it doesn't really have to be. It doesn't have to be at that level. And I think for me, the first thing that comes to mind is accents and wacky voices.
Yeah, that's a big one for sure.
Because especially if you're watching things like stream shows, watching like Critical Role and everything, I mean, they're professional voice actors. Very few people can live up to what they do when they portray their characters. But I will note, not even all of them use an accent or a specific voice for their characters, especially in campaign 1.
Yeah, I dare say maybe a handful of the cast on Critical Role has actually taken like accent training for certain things. I can name 2 who I guess probably have, maybe 3. The other ones, maybe it's more just natural, pick it up kind of thing.
Yeah, and even when doing that, even if you decide you want to do some kind of a character voice, which can be daunting, for sure, because there's always the fear of embarrassment. And I think even especially when you're DMing, and you decide you want to do a different character voice, that's something you have to surmount. You have to just be like, I'm going to be embarrassed by the things that I do, and I have to get over it. But when you're a new role player, just if you want to do a different character voice, you don't necessarily have to do an accent, or you don't unless you just have one that you're familiar with and you're pretty good at, or you like doing. That's fine. You can, just change the method of your speaking. You can decide your character has a bit of a deeper voice, add a little bit of gravel to it, change the pace that they speak at. Perhaps they're very slow speaker, very
Pauses between
thoughtful.
words.
And we've kind of covered that a little bit. I
Hmm.
think if you do want to do something, which is totally optional, you can just use your everyday voice, but role play in other ways at first. You could do things that are easier than learning an accent.
And you may want to, as a beginner, especially just to avoid any self-inflicted stress on jumping into that.
Unless you just some people already have accents and stuff. They really like
Yeah,
using them. Then go for it. You
do
play to your
what's
strengths.
comfortable. Yeah.
Um, and feel free to throw out if you have other um,
Uh,
things you
well,
think are.
I don't know if I'd consider it necessarily a fallacy. It could be maybe just a misconception that
Mm-hmm.
kind of tying along with the embarrassment factor that people will judge you. And I gave this one
Mm,
some thought in that you're sitting around a table or an internet table, if you're playing Roll20 or online with people who are also here to role play. They're not, a lot of them, either might be new and or even experienced. They want to do the same thing that you're about to do, and they're not going to judge you for it. It's not like there's an audience watching you or listening to
mm,
you, unless you're streaming, in case there might be. But they're all here to do the same thing you are doing
yeah.
as something of a hobby, and they're just as much into it as you want to be or will be or are. And there's less fear if you think of it that way, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. Um, and I would say, even bearing in mind of that, also keeping in mind that the other people, even the more experienced role players at the table or the virtual table or whatever the case may be, are probably also somewhat self-conscious about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I still like I've been role playing and DMing and GMing and stuff for 15 years, and get I can still be pretty self-conscious about a lot of the stuff I do, about the character voices I do. There are certain accents and things I won't do generally, or I avoid a lot because they're really bad. And try as I might, they're still bad. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want to do it because I'll feel. I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna do that one.
Yeah. Oftentimes we preface it being like, I'm going to try this accent and it's going to slip through all of Europe throughout the night. So forgive me.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's the only way you tend to get better at them is by doing them really poorly for a long
Yeah.
time. But actively working on them, doing them poorly, but working on improving them and going, okay, stop doing that and figuring out what works for you. Um, I think another thing that it, it can be a fallacy is thinking that you have to do a ton of work on your backstory and your character in order to role play. I don't think you have to write 10 pages of backstory in order to be able to role play. It helps to have a well thought out backstory. Uh, Kind of tying in with this, you don't have to have a fully fleshed out character. Uh, I would say, even amongst people who do write 10 pages of backstory, who do have very well thought out characters, we often still don't know exactly how we want to role play our character until we're a couple sessions in.
Yeah. Yeah. Your pages and everything you come up with will not be the end definement of your character. You will transition through a few sessions of being like, oh, you know what, this actually sounds better or this works better. I didn't think of that before. Now that I'm doing this, that makes more sense.
Yeah, there's some of those aspects that may be reduced. You may have things you thought your character was going to be all about and focus on, and then those get minimized. They're not as important anymore, or removed completely. You're like, it's not necessary. That's a silly element. I don't need that. Um, Instead, I'm gonna. This feels more natural, or I'm enjoying doing this more. Um, there's also thrown into the deep end. As Malice kind of says in chat here, learning to roleplay more effectively through LARP. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I actually think playing in a like a theater of the mind game can be very useful for people being introduced to roleplay. who learning to role play characters for the first time or early in their experience. And because this is a beginner episode, Theater of the Mind essentially is a game that's not really hard into rules and maps and tactical positioning and all of that stuff. Instead, the combat and the encounters and stuff tend to be more imaginative. It tends to be
Hmm.
more just described as, okay, you're standing here, there's a monster over there, blah 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 blah. What do you want to do? And then you just say what you want to do because you're not limited by rules and having to think, okay, I want to move here and do this. Sometimes with games like D&D, it can be a little restrictive because while it certainly can be fun, uh, you're having to sit there and think instead of thinking, okay, what do I want to do? You have to go, what can I do?
Yeah.
And start really flipping through your sheet and going, okay, I want to shoot him with magic missile. I want to stab him with my sword. You get kind of rooted down into mundane things, whereas a little bit more theater of the mind, which LARP very much is, in to the extreme end,
Hmm.
really. Um, you get you're not really. I mean, you still have a character sheet. There are still rules and things, but you can at least attempt like anything. You can be like, well, I want to. I want to go and run over here and do this, but my sheet doesn't really necessarily say I can do that, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'd say maps make it more board game to people's minds too. Yeah, yeah. That's kind of what I mean. Like D&D and stuff, when you're getting down into maps and everything, um, it tends to get people thinking about the rules and, almost like a chess mentality. I can move diagonal. I can't move straight. Um, and I don't think so much that it prevents you from role playing or prevents you from thinking as much as it occupies brain space. It goes, all right, think about these things, so you're thinking less about performance.
Hmm. Yeah. I think with tabletop role playing, um, it's certainly not just a for fantasy nerds thing. Uh, at
Especially
its
not anymore.
core, yeah, especially not. There's so many other platforms out there, and at its core, it's really just hobby acting with people of like-minded interest in who want to role play. So regardless what the platform you're playing is, it's not Dungeons and Dragons only anymore.
Yeah. And
Um,
go ahead.
no, that's about it. It's hobby acting with ideally friends, people you know, usually not always, but uh, it's that small core friendship and just acting.
Yeah, and I can see how it can still be kind of embarrassing to think about and stuff for people like my age and older. Because I very much remember a time when, yes, it was socially stigmatizing to say that you play D&D. There were perhaps social ramifications for that. There were people at school who would think you worship the devil because you play Dungeons and Dragons, or any other tabletop game.
Yeah,
Um,
certainly not a Satanist game of any kind.
you're
It's
usually
very
defeating
fun.
evil. And
Yeah.
that's how I had to explain it to my parents once, long, long ago. I was like, yeah, we're killing demons. We're not. um,
We're not
but
summoning
anyway,
them.
uh, but to your point, I think that actually transitions really well to my next topic I wanted to discuss, because every table is different.
Hmm.
Every play group is different. Some people don't do any character role play. Some people just go in and they view D&D as a tactical sort of game, and that's how they play. They want to be very min max. They want to have the best characters, charge into combat, destroy everything. That's how they do. Some people do both, uh, and so I think the one of the important steps you can do as a beginner role player is to become familiar with the people at your table. You know,
For sure.
and so I thought we take a minute to maybe talk about ways that they can do that. Become more familiar with the people they're playing with. I think first and foremost is talking to your DM or your GM.
Hmm.
about their expectations for the game, how they like things to run, how much roleplay do they do, how much roleplay do they want to see in the game. If you're not familiar with the other people playing, are they familiar with them and what they expect or what they usually do?
Right.
And similarly, tell them what your concerns are and what your expectations are, because you're perfectly allowed to have expectations, just like the game master is.
Absolutely. And it's hard maybe to gauge a full spectrum of how role play heavy the other players are without actually seeing them do it. And maybe you can just sit in. Typically groups jump from a game to a game to a game over the course of time. If they happen to be doing a different game, maybe they're doing multiple games a week like we do, you
Or
can
an
sit in on
ongoing
one of their
game.
sessions. Yeah, just sit in on a session that you're not a part of and ask to listen and see how they do it, and see how much fun they have or how angry they get at each other.
And I would say
um,
most tabletop role players I've engaged with are perfectly fine with people watching.
yeah,
Um, we play most of our games online and in Discord, and sometimes we'll have people just pop in there while we're playing, and as long as they're not interrupting us, no one cares.
yeah, it's a good way to just listen and get a feel for how they do things, especially if it's a group who always plays together.
Hmm. Let's see. My other thought on this is to talk to the other players, especially if they're people you know a little bit or you're familiar with, but to talk to them about their experience and about your experience. You don't necessarily have to go through the DM. If you don't know any of them, then maybe it's probably less awkward to go to the DM and kind of suss it out that way.
Yeah,
But I think probably the most beneficial thing is to talk to some of the players and kind of phrase it like that. Talk about experience, um, what their experiences are, what games they've played. How they prefer to play their characters, and then also talk about your own experience. Because it can be useful to them for you to tell them, like, if you've only played a handful of games or you've never role played a character before, but you've played D&D, but there wasn't really any role play, um, because like knowing that for most people will make them less judgmental.
yeah, for sure. And ideally, they're hopefully not judgmental at all. But
Yeah.
you certainly, for veteran players or even moderately, time-based players, it would help them to know that someone new is coming into the system and expect a little more patience on your end in that regard in dealing with helping someone new who's not quite so familiar.
So, I did want to talk about a few common roleplay rules of the road. Just some common core practices, things that you think this applies universally.
Yeah,
Um,
do's and don'ts.
Do's and don'ts, things you can write down as law. Um, and I will start with one that's not really a law. I would say is just a best common practice in general to not interrupt people. It's gonna happen, and this is why
Yeah,
I say it's not a law per se, because it's gonna happen. Eventually, you're gonna get excited about something, you're gonna say something, and you're gonna interrupt, or people won't shut up, and you have to throw your stuff out there.
yeah.
Uh,
It does happen more via internet-based games,
yes,
just because we can't see it. Someone's like preparing to speak or anything. You don't have any of that. So a lot of talking over and a lot of give and take in that regard.
yeah, but kind of similar to how we do this podcast. If you start talking and someone else is already talking, just stop.
Go ahead.
Just
Yeah.
oh, sorry. You
Yeah.
continue. Finish. Don't keep going. That's one thing that will upset people if you like interrupt them in the middle of a sentence and then you just keep going while they're talking. um, but in general, try not to interrupt
It's
people. But
yeah.
don't feel too bad if you do. Just again, stop there and let them finish, because it's gonna happen. And in some cases, if you don't ever kind of throw yourself out there, it can be hard to
Yeah.
get out there.
Second one, and this is more of a law. would be don't take player agency away from other players.
That is a
Don't
good one.
don't perform an action and assume that your action goes through without a proper player reaction to the thing. You're like, if I'm going to throw a punch at you, I'm not just saying I punch you and it hits. There's a process, and does another player allow this? How do they respond to it? It's a give and take with choices, and nothing just happens and is automatically successful.
Yeah, and I would say there is actually, I would say, a little bit of wiggle room in that. I feel only in how you who's talking, I guess. Whether you're and how definitive you're being about it, because like I could for instance say, if you look at the DM and you're like, if someone's holding something and you look at the DM, you're like, oh, I'm gonna snatch that. That's different than just saying I reach over and steal that from your character.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Phrasing, because your DM will then cue you with, okay, make a check, or
yeah,
and the attempt hasn't quite happened yet, but you've defined your intent.
yeah, and that's kind of and that is something that you don't have to be as terrified about in tabletop roleplay. I think than with other methods where there's not a definitive game master.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like that can definitely be an issue in some methods where there's not a full-time GM looming over you, but like in D&D and stuff where you have a dungeon master there, that's their role, is to mitigate some of those things. So even if you do end up saying, my character reaches over and snatches that from you, then it's kind of the GM's role to go, well, you're gonna need to make a check for that.
Yeah,
So you don't have to be super anal about it, but it is a good thing to know as a rule. Like, you can't tell other people what their characters do. So you shouldn't, even more so than doing something to someone's character, you absolutely shouldn't be like, your character does this, or your character
yeah,
responds like this to something that I just did. Now, if you cast a spell or something and it says that that's what they do, that's important for them to know.
yeah.
And sometimes the DM will do that, which is where I think it can get a little fishy for a new role player. It's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes okay for the storyteller or the DM to do that.
Yeah,
Um, Not so much for another player.
yeah. You as a new player will often probably hear a DM describe maybe like a mindset that you might be feeling, just to inflict a certain mood of the situation. Like if something happens, and knowing the DM knows your character and would probably just say, you feel very afraid in this moment, and then it's your response to kind of act that out, but won't take
Yeah,
control over you. Will just kind of give you a mood set that you would probably be feeling from this situation.
yeah. This should be pretty frightening.
Yeah,
Now, generally, hopefully, uh, the storyteller or the DM can evoke that in a different way than just telling you it's frightening.
you're afraid.
But
Yeah,
that's not always easy to do, especially
yeah,
with certain games like D&D, where player characters can start to feel kind of invincible. Um, they start hitting a certain level. They're like, I'm not scared of a guard. I can kill a guard. Yeah, you probably can. um, I can kill this old man on the side of the road if I need to. I'm not worried about him.
indeed.
Sometimes you got to resort to, it's scary.
Yeah.
Um,
Another one is players, regardless of setting, Fireball I'll use for D&D, often don't like to be hit by other players' stuff.
that's true.
Attacking players, even accidentally, or in like an AoE setting of Fireball and D&D, other settings have some other things. They typically don't like it when you hurt them, unless you've had a conversation. Hey, are you okay if I use this Fireball? I'm going to use Fireball. And some players might be like, just do it, I'll take it, I can take the damage, or they might be very upset if you hit them.
Especially because a lot of people do get very attached to their characters, and if you're threatening killing their character, even accidentally, they're not going to be very happy about that. And that actually makes me think of a tip, not really a rule, but a tip for roleplay, and that is to think realistically about what people would do in real life in circumstances relating to other characters and NPCs and things. For instance, if you could cast Fireball in real life, you would probably make sure you're not going to hit all your friends with it, because that would
Yeah,
be bad. You would
very.
probably take great care. If you're shooting a gun around, you're probably not going to point it at people that you do not want to be harmed by it. And let those inform your in-game
Yeah.
actions. Let's see. Another thing I have is don't hog the spotlight.
Mhm.
This is not something I usually find beginner role players having a problem with. Usually I find them more having a problem taking the spotlight at all and
Yeah.
just kind of hiding. But, and it's okay. It's okay to go for a while. It's okay to talk or have your character do a lot of stuff. Just be mindful of how often you're doing it and how much you're doing it. And remember to sometimes let other people do things. Even if
Yeah.
you're the best at it, you know, maybe let someone else do it
It
on
it probably
occasion.
comes up more as far as like taking it when someone else is in the midst of trying to do a thing,
Yeah.
and a new person or even a not new person wants to help a lot, and they're always that first to be like, I'll assist, and immediately, when the first roll or something fails, you jump in to try to change the situation, um, instead of just letting them do their thing, failure or success.
And that sometimes comes along with don't interrupt people. Uh,
Yeah,
they're working on doing something, and you jump in there and impose some other
yeah.
uh, random event or behavior, trying to help perhaps, but
It's hard not to do.
yeah,
I do it occasionally. I find
everyone
myself,
does.
yeah. You want to help. You want to make the act happening a success, and provide your own little touch to it, but you don't have to
Yeah, it's about
always.
a lot of these things are about quantity. It's okay to take the spotlight sometimes. It's okay to relish in it a bit. It's okay to if you talk over people sometimes, a little bit. It's just a matter of quantity and whether or not you're trying to not abuse it. You're trying to not interrupt people and talk over them the whole time and things like that.
Yeah.
As long as you're putting a little effort in there, it's fine. Um, I would say another thing that's kind of I'll save that for a minute because that's not really a rule per se. It's a little bit more of a tip, I think. Um, a different one I have is set out behaviors for your character. I said earlier you don't have to have a fully fleshed out character to roleplay, but what I would say you do need to have as a base, just rule, a guideline, is a general list of behaviors, or rules, if you prefer to phrase it that way. Like, my character does this, my character does this. These are behaviors, things that my character will do, and most importantly, going with that, things your character won't do.
Hmm.
Um, for instance, if you are making a character who is perhaps a little morally questionable and might steal from someone, well, under what circumstances would they steal from someone? And under what circumstances would they kill someone? Especially in D&D or similar tabletop games where you might end up fighting people or creatures. Uh, where's that line? And you don't have to get super detailed with it. Just having a general idea, like, okay, they're not going to kill someone who's not threatening their life. That's
Hmm.
a pretty easy rule to apply in there. And you can get more complicated with those as you become more experienced. It's just, have a few basic rules for your character. Things that they will do, things that they won't do, things that they won't tolerate. You have a character that absolutely will not tolerate someone else killing someone without just cause. That's that's important. Um, you don't have to. Your character doesn't necessarily have to put up with everything that other people in the
Yeah.
party do. Serious guideline: you are going to be playing in a party. Make your character with party unity in mind.
Super
Uh,
helpful.
yes, you should. That doesn't. it doesn't mean you have to agree with the party on everything 24/7 by any means,
Right.
but you should try to make a character that's going to work with the party. For instance, using my previous example, if the rest of the party are all like thugs or criminals of some sort, and you make a paladin who is extremely lawful, you're a little bit in the wrong, perhaps. You should perhaps make someone who's a little bit more willing to go along with what the party is
Yeah.
probably going to be doing.
And that comes with some session zero talks with DM and other players on what type of party and or game are we playing. Let's set some common goals here that we can all follow.
Yeah. And most of the time, most stories and stuff, you're not playing like criminals and things. So you're usually playing adventurers, depending on the setting and the tabletop game itself. So it can be easier to do stuff like that. But, just it's a thing to bear in mind.
Yeah.
The other one I have that is a hard rule: don't take in character things out of character.
Super, super, super important.
And sometimes it can be a little hard, especially in certain games. It's usually not a problem as much in like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and fantasy adventuring games like that, as much as it is in things like Vampire the Masquerade, where
Yeah.
characters may actually be opposed to one another. I mean, someone may actually get someone else's character killed on purpose. But
Yeah.
it's an important rule. Things that happen to characters in character should stay in character. And similarly, the converse is the same. Applies as well. Out of character stuff should not go in character. Just because you're ticked off today, you should not take that out on other people's characters.
Yeah. If you're angry at work or in real life, you leave that at work and away from your computer or your table group. At the moment you're playing and rolling dice, you're there to have fun, and you leave everything else out.
And metagaming, as you mentioned, as Malice just mentioned in chat, metagaming is when you take out of character knowledge that you as the player have, but your character does not, and you make your character behave due to it.
Yeah.
It's a bigger problem in certain games than others. Like, it can be a really big problem in Vampire the Masquerade, where unless the storyteller intentionally keeps things secret, a lot of times you may know things that are very secret about other people's characters. And
Mm-hmm.
you are supposed to not have your character know that because they don't know it.
Yeah. A common one you see throughout most platforms is a DM or GM may not pull a single character aside to explain what a certain role was or explain information based off a role, and the whole party will hear that, and they'll have their out of character juice moment, but they don't know any of that technically unless the player specifically says, I tell the group, I tell the party this, so they can't react on that.
Yeah, it is important things to bear in mind. I think that really covers the core basic rules that you need to follow. The big ones are, don't metagame, don't take character stuff out of character or out of character stuff in character. Don't interrupt people and steal the spotlight and stuff. Paying attention,
especially
nice.
If you're at a group table. I mean, even if you're playing online, it's easier online to not know if someone is or isn't paying attention. But if you're at the table, everyone will see that you either look bored or you're invested in it, and that will affect how they kind of role play around you, and just pay attention.
Especially if you're live at a table, don't keep pulling your phone out. It's okay if you checked it like once every so often, but generally, like, just put it away.
Unless you're using it for D&D Beyond, like level stuff, where you're looking up spells and you have access to things you need for your character on there.
Yeah, because that is especially like the visual feedback, especially for a DM or your GM, is really important. And if we're looking over and you look bored, or you're not, even if you're like, am flipping through my phone. I'm interested. I'm not bored, but I'm flipping on my phone. It looks like you're bored,
Yeah.
and we begin immediately second guessing everything that we're doing. Like, is my game terrible? Have I just failed at everything? Am I not creating an interesting encounter? We're doing that anyway, but we do it more
Yeah.
when we think people are bored.
And you might find yourself getting sidestepped in conversation if other players are like, well, they're not really participating or paying attention. Let's ask someone else, let's engage in this conversation. And they start pushing you away, perhaps, and you don't want that.
Yeah, Malice, it's a rule of life in general, and yet I go to so many meetings where people whip out their phones in the middle of the meeting and they're sitting there doing stuff, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah. What are you doing?
What are you doing? We're in a meeting. But anyway, so I think we could just move on to talking about general tips.
Yes.
Things to help a new player make their role play pop. Things that hopefully aren't like super labor intensive. Aren't
you. Yeah. I think a good one in general to start with for making a character is to walk in with the notion that you are not special. You are not unique. You are not like the single focus of the story. Typically, it's you and a whole bunch of other people who are a victim of consequence in 99% of the case. So you're not going to be all powerful and have access to everything, and work small, work as if life around you have no control over.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not to say that you can't have bold character ambitions, like
Right.
And I think those are great if you can sit there and think, I want my character to invent a super high level spell that's really crazy and awesome and yada yada yada, and might do this or something. Tell your game master that. Tell your storyteller what those aspirations are, but be prepared for them to temper them, for them to say, well, that may not be realistic. This story is only gonna go to level 6. You're not gonna learn any super high level spells, or yada yada yada. Don't be upset if they try to bring them to a realistic level or something.
Yeah.
Just don't go in trying to thinking that your character is gonna be the focus of the story. At some points they will be. At some points, the story will focus on your character, and your character will get to do amazing things. But 70% of the time, other people are getting their time to do amazing things.
Yeah. The kind of leading into that is, a lot of people draw inspiration from real world entertainment, movies, anime, TV shows, whatever. And you find a lot of Mary Sue, is what they call them, characters, people who are, thrust into unique situations of power because they're destined to be the best hero ever.
They're just
Stay away from
innately
that.
good at things.
Yeah, innately like the best at everything, and it's okay to not be good at anything. You have a few things you're probably going to be really good at, but you can't be good at everything the way stats work in the game. So don't come in expecting that you should or that you will.
Yeah.
Embrace flaw.
Even if you just have amazing stats, embracing some flaws, having a character and intentionally building in one or two flaws in how that character behaves or how they do things can be a real powerful way to improve your role play. Without having to, rely on accents and crazy voices and stuff, or build tons of backstory. You could just say, well, my character's lazy. Simple. Easy to throw out there. Something you can pull up in any situation just randomly, be like, I don't want to do that.
I'll just go last in the fight every time. You guys go.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you want us to do this thing? Or greedy. I was just watching one of Tabletop to Keyboard's streams, and they had some people, hijack a cart and steal it and bring it over to somebody for money, and they did, and then the person was like, hey, I want you to take this cart over to my shop over on the other side of town. And they're like, that wasn't part of the contract. We're going to need some more money for that. And I'm like, on the one hand, you're like, that's kind of greedy. Also fair. um, and those sorts of things are good character flaws to have.
Yeah.
Fight initiates and the scuba takes a nap. One thing I would say is improvisation is not something that everyone's experienced with. It's not something everyone is good at doing. In fact, I would say most of us are not really good at improvising things on the top of our head.
Not to start out with, for sure.
But the simple thing to remember, like the base tip and rule for improvisation is yes and. If someone else introduces something or is improvising something, go along with it most of the time, you know? Even if it's like, where did they get that from, you know? Unless it's something that's like patently wrong or something, you know, just go, okay, and then add to it, you know, add your own
Yeah.
stuff to it. Just run with it. Let somebody else do the work for you, kind of. You know, they throw out something and you just grab it and go, well, okay, then. And even if that's someone inserting themselves in a bathtub in a scene that no one previously knew they were in there, and that's a season 1 CR
Yeah.
reference.
I got it. I got it. It was a funny moment. Everyone laughed.
Yeah, yeah. Wait, what? How long have you been there? Oh, this whole time. Uh, another thing I would say as a tip, using established character relationships.
Mhm.
You know, if you're a newer role player, do you have a friend that's playing at the table? You know, see if your character can be like their cousin or their twin brother or whatever. And that's a really good way to help introduce a newer player to the group, but also to get some role play in, because now, and I'm feeling like this is a common theme, you're making that other role player work for you, because almost any role play thing they do, because their character's related to yours, gives you opportunity to role play.
Yeah. Yeah. You can react to it or have opinions, more heavy opinions about
Mm-hmm.
things that your connections do than other characters.
I hadn't realized this was a common theme in some of mine, but a lot of mine are
Yeah.
about having other people do work for you in role play.
Yeah.
Here's another one that has someone else doing work for you, but requires you to do a little bit of work. And this is a trope, but it's a character trope for a reason. The tragic backstory. Spending a little bit of time working on backstory. Again, it doesn't have to be 10 pages, but most of the time in tabletop, in D&D and stuff, most people have tragic backstories of some sort. So again, don't go in
Hmm.
thinking, you know, I'm the unicorn, because you're not. They're all terrible. And I generally try to tell people to avoid being super edgy with it. You know, that's a tendency some people can have, uh, to make it super grim dark, which sometimes
Everyone
it can be fine.
died.
Sometimes it can be fine.
Yeah.
It all depends on how you play it off. But you know, have a tragic backstory, something that happened in your past that has perhaps motivated you to be an adventurer or whatever the case is, um, because that gives both you somewhere to pull roleplay from, but it also gives the storyteller something to pull roleplay from, something to pull events from. You know, if your family was killed by gnolls, the storyteller's probably going to make you fight gnolls.
Yeah.
Probably a lot.
Yeah. And that one actually leads into this one. Is that character creation doesn't or shouldn't stop when the campaign starts. Character creation is a constant evolution, and a good character will have changes in the way they do things and have reactions and evolution to their personality through all these things happening that the DM throws at you based off of your backstory or other people's backstories. Don't be so sure-footed in I have this concept, this is it from level 1 to level whatever you're going to. Be flexible with adjusting.
Mm, absolutely. Um, tragic backstory idea. Oh god. Wow. Uh, it's way
I
too soon.
expect nothing less.
hmm Uh, to kind of wrap off my making the DM work for you spiel, there's a couple different things you can do to make the DM or the storyteller do some of the role play work for you. Uh, and a lot, and to encapsulate them, it's just have important people in your character's life. Don't kill them all off. Don't have your tragic past have like everyone that you knew and cared about is dead. You really do yourself a disservice, because if you have a family you care about, the DM can do things to them, and then that gives you opportunity to be in the spotlight. If you have a rival, someone that your character doesn't like that they've been competing against, your storyteller can bring them into the story and put them at forefront, which then in turn puts your character in forefront, which can be scary at times, but and usually is, but provides you good opportunity where you didn't have to throw yourself out there and do stuff. You made the DM do it for you. And do not make a background that was, I was a child of a werewolf and a vampire and I'm now an angel. Just slow your roll. Keep it simple. I think keep it simple is a good tip.
That means
At
play
first,
human when you're playing D&D.
I mean, you don't have to, but
Yeah, no.
it's
It's a good
you know
starter race.
it is. People don't want to play human a lot. I actually kind of blame D&D for that. Like, I get annoyed that so many tabletop games want humans to just be generally good at everything. It irritates me. I'm like, just make good humans good at something. Stop trying to
Yeah.
be like humans are just generically good at all things, but not as good as anyone else. Anyway, it's a tangent. Getting me on a soapbox issue.
Yeah. Practice, I would say. Think about maybe a session you just played, and like if you feel as a new person that you're having trouble getting into responding and being upfront in social rather than reacting to other people asking you a question and just waiting around, think about places in that last session where you had a reason to have said something and didn't, and maybe just practice, off the side while you're driving, especially if you live in Southern California. You have a lot of time with that. um,
So much time driving.
so much time driving, and hopefully don't go crazy in the process of talking to yourself, but it's okay to practice and to think about those things, because when you think about them, you're learning from it and getting better.
And if you do want to practice character voices while you're in the car by yourself, is a good time where
No
you'll look
one will
less
judge you.
crazy.
You might get a few looks from people like, there's no phone, I don't hear anything.
They'll think you're singing in your car. It's fine.
Yeah.
um, I kind of going along with what Malice said about keeping it simple. One of my tips was going to be back off the crazy. Um, keep it a little simple. You don't have to dial everything up to 11.
Yeah.
Make it obviously it's fantasy or it's some other type, or it's sci-fi or some type of role play. So obviously it's not going to be necessarily super realistic, but just don't take it to the extreme level, and also don't play a character that's crazy. um,
I'm
and I,
guilty.
and I apologize because I do know some people don't like the use of the word crazy, but in this instance, I use it for a very specific reason, because I'm not talking about playing a character with a mental issue, which I think as a beginner you probably should avoid too. Specifically, when you think about someone who's crazy, you get a certain mental image, and I'm like, don't do that. Do not play the character that is completely deranged or completely zany. It could be fine to be funny, to play a funny character. Just don't take it to the extent where they are, wacko from the Animaniacs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dial it down a little bit.
Absolutely. And there are different play styles. Even while you're role playing, you might hear the term like murder hobo, which is someone who loves to just kill and attack things, like fight, give me fights constantly. You can
No
still role play in those
consequences, no
moments.
morals,
Yeah.
just stab them.
Be aware of some of those. Maybe ask if you hear what other people are talking about terms and you don't understand. Feel free to ask because they do mean something, and kind of learn the different types of these things because everyone falls into one of them as a player. Figure out what you are as well so you can make sure you're even fitting with the right group.
And there is no shame in playing an easy to play character.
No.
Especially, some, as Malice is kind of getting at, some systems have characters that are harder to role play. They may be fun, but they're advanced level play. Like playing a Malkavian in Vampire tends to be harder to do without it being cheesy. Um, and so, yeah, maybe don't do that for your first character. Maybe save that for another time. As Brand mentioned earlier, if you're playing D&D for the first time ever, maybe just make a human, something you're
Yeah.
familiar with. Unless you're just super familiar with elves or something, then whatever. But do something that's not too crazy difficult, that doesn't require you to completely get out of your comfort zone and
Yeah.
do something that you're not familiar with already.
Absolutely.
My last thing, I have one more tip. One more.
I think I have one too.
Uno
Yeah.
mas. Have a driving purpose. At least one. At least one driving purpose for your character. Again, you don't have to completely fully flesh out your character. Just figure out, all right, what is my character's core goal? And communicate that to the storyteller. Tell them this is what my character's all about. This is perhaps what's driven them to adventure or whatever the case may be. And this is what they want to achieve. They want to be they want to earn their place amongst the aristocracy of their city. They want to earn the respect and approval of their family. They want to master time travel, even if it can't happen. And sometimes having a goal that can't happen is fine as long as you realize it can't happen. For instance, I mentioned earlier, you may be like, my character wants to invent this super amazing, powerful spell, and the DM turns around and says, "Well, we're only playing to level 6." You can be like, as long as you're okay with them not achieving the goal, you can still be like, well, that's still their goal. They just won't get
Yeah.
there, but they're going to be working on it.
Right. There are actions along the way that can happen towards the idea that it would eventually get achieved.
Isn't that just playing character? Your werevamp angel. And the goal should not be to kill the party.
Yeah.
That should go without saying.
He says that as I have a character who quite verbally tells the party, one day I'm going to kill you. I have a list of who goes first.
But he's never going to do it.
But he's never really going to do it. He just says it.
And goals can evolve, and ideally they should. That may be something that you don't get to, or is more advanced play, but it's something to bear in mind.
Yeah.
So did you have
I
one
did.
last one?
My last tip is, especially for new beginners, is it's super, super easy to play yourself because you don't have to do anything. But when you're getting into the role play part of it, the acting, you might find that parts of yourself you really don't like. So be careful with bringing things in that you're either uncomfortable with yourself with, or you might find it actually easier to pick like a completely different character off the shelf from a show you like or a TV character and try to do that first and emulate it rather than allowing yourself to fully be explored. Sorry. Just because you have to maybe deal with some of your own things that are going on and it might trigger you.
And I would add to that by saying it's okay to play a character that is a little bit of wish fulfillment. I think honestly most of people's tabletop characters, for probably the first several years, if not forever, when they role play, is a little bit of wish fulfillment. Because who doesn't want to
Yeah.
play a wizard that can throw fireball? You know,
Right.
it's okay to have some of that, to have some aspects of yourself or things that you desire about yourself. Like, oh, I want to be super charming, so I want to play a character with a really high charisma. You know, these are things I wish I would do if I were bold enough to do, or I had the charisma or whatever. That's okay to do some of that, but just don't carbon copy yourself. You know.
Yeah.
I actually thought of one more when you were saying that. I thought
Okay.
of one more thing. Let's see. Malice said he likes to play a single aspect of himself and then form that into a bigger picture. Yeah, yeah. It's okay to work out some parts of yourself and into the character. And I think I think people tend to do that anyway. It's really
Yeah.
hard to
Not
to
to
play a character you don't identify with at all. And so you either have to have some parts of yourself in it, or have done enough thinking about it to really
be different.
empathize with them,
Yeah.
which usually involves creating a whole backstory and all that stuff and really getting into it. Acting, and it's probably a bit much. So you're probably going to have some aspects of yourself in it. So my last thing is, and this actually kind of goes back as somewhat of a rule more than a role playing tip. Be aware that certain things trigger people and that it's not funny. It's not something to be made light of. Um, there are certain subject matter that shouldn't be brought up in most games. And certain things your character might say or do. This is all make believe, so you can certainly say you're going to do whatever, but in some cases you shouldn't. And this applies for players. It applies for storytellers.
Hmm.
Uh, and if a game is going to have some more mature elements in it, generally speaking, it's the storyteller or the DM should tell people ahead of time and make sure that it's going to be okay. And if you have something that you want to do in your character's backstory or something you want to do with your character that might fall in an area that might bother somebody, or might be more mature, talk to the storyteller, tell your DM about that beforehand. Before you get real
Yeah.
invested in it, make sure it's going to work for that table and for that group. And if someone does say they have a problem with something, don't take offense to that.
Yeah. Be respectful, and vice versa. If you have offense with something,
Speak up.
speak up. Yeah.
Yeah. And if someone has an issue with something, don't push. You back off. I won't say that there are no tables around where that sort of thing is okay to push on and everything. I'm sure there are. But most tables, if people do take offense to something or they get upset about something and you insist on pushing on it anyway, that's just going to get you kicked from the table.
Yeah.
At least I hope so, because it's not okay. So just, and there's no special things that go in that list. Those are all things that you shouldn't or wouldn't say out of RP. If there are things that are not socially acceptable out of RP, they're generally not socially acceptable in RP either.
Yeah. Yeah. The the name role play is not something that gives you, sorry again, free reign to act upon things that you wouldn't normally do. That's
Yeah.
not what it does.
Yeah. In most cases.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much that. Poor Mike's gonna have a concussion. I know, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty much it from me. Is that it for
That's it
you?
for me. Yeah.
I think
I'm
that's
sure
enough.
we
We
could
got
sit here for a while and
yeah,
probably turn out more, but
yeah, but we got a solid hour of basic practices, tips, rules, even for role play for beginner in any tabletop setting.
stay away from chests.
Because, um, remember, if it's a stage, it's probably not a mimic. But that chest probably is. Bye, everybody.